Let's talk about just, I think the story has been told countless times of just how bad Africa's infrastructure is, and how much that costs industry in terms of additional costs to produce goods and products and send goods across the borders. But give us a sense across the continent of just how bad it is and how much work needs to be done to get things right.
Yeah, Godfrey. Bridge shipping plays in the southern-eastern Africa, and the region is going through a bit of a purple patch. And I think that purple patch is going to run for between another 5 and 10 years, and that's on the back of this commodity super cycle that we're seeing, precipitated by the demand in Far East and the Middle East. But we have got a bottleneck, and that bottleneck is only going to get bigger. Just to give you an example, in the next 5 years, there's going to be an extra 327 million tons of cargo that has to move out of those corridors. And those are the corridors that we play in. And this is excluding extra capacity or cargo generated out of South Africa. So those are all the countries across our borders below Kenya.
Yeah.
Coupled with that is the infrastructure spend in the region is going to create extra logistics capacity to the tune of 122 million tons. Now, this is a deficit of 205 million tons that has to move, and that will move come 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
So the supply is the demand is much greater than the supply on the infrastructure corridors, and prices will go up.
Yeah.
And this puts the investor in quite a precarious situation, because he has to have route to market. Without route to market, he won't invest.
Yeah. Now, the statistics that you roll, of course, speak of huge opportunity across the region that you're talking about. Are we seeing the right framework being put in place to get investors to come and provide the logistics?
Yeah, Godfrey, I think where it's an equation of risk and reward.
Yeah.
The investors, if the reward is there, they will face the risk. And there has been private sector participation. Unfortunately, some of the bureaucracy in these regions frighten away investors. We've got infrastructure in all those regions. We've played in that space for 30 years, but it's very slow. And private industry moves at 140 k's an hour. Government, unfortunately, moves at 40 k's an hour.
I would say maybe 10 kilometers an hour. And that's despite all the efforts that we've seen around in trying to improve intra-regional trade. We've got these trade blocks. We've got COMESA, you've got SADC, you've got the East African Community, and all those coming in, and still we get these bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Now, from an investor perspective, what will it take, do you think, to try to get governments to think like the private sector, to act like the private sector, at least in terms of improving that overall infrastructure deficit and improve the bottlenecks?
Yeah. Godfrey, I mean, our president, part of his budget speech motivated a huge push to create employment. If the government sets the rules and a solid foundation for private enterprise to thrive, it'll create employment.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be part of a big push behind government.
Yeah, but there's the bottleneck, isn't it? And this is the problem, because now we've got the government inviting the private sector. Let's talk about the current problem around the toll gates and the toll fees, etc. Now, we've got the government working through the private sector to provide the infrastructure that Johannesburg and the Gauteng economy needs. At the same time, there's a cost here. How do you strike that balance between paying for the cost and maintaining the infrastructure in the state it ought to be?
It's difficult. I think Spoon Ndebele has got a fight on his hands, which will be interesting to see this thing roll out. And I don't think the consumer can afford what's been tabled for the toll gates, because the consumer's hit twice. He's hit by the fact that the extra cost of logistics to get the product to market, and then the consumer has to get to the market himself. So he's hit twice.
Yeah.
And I think I think, and I haven't followed this in a huge amount of depth or detail, but I think what irks us as the consumer is government's policy or stance on a cost plus model, where market forces are taken out of play, and it's a cost plus model. You know, us in private business, it would be a lovely place for us to be able to dictate our prices.
Absolutely. So how do we compete? How do we maintain the competitiveness of South Africa's industry in the face of these bottlenecks, where when money needs to be put in to pay for the infrastructure, we then struggle to pay it back?
Yeah, Godfrey, I think it's always a tough question to ask, but I think efficiencies, economies of scale should be bringing prices down. The economies of scale are not bringing the price down. They're pushing the pricing. They're pushing the pricing up.
Yeah. Now, if you had a conversation with Brian Molefe, recently appointed CEO of Transnet. Now, we know Transnet is the logistics leader in South Africa. If you had a conversation with him around the unbundling of some of his assets and the kind of issues that he looks at, what would you say to him?
I'd say, aslangana. Meaning, let's get together, let the private enterprise, let government.
Is there a role for government?
I think there's definitely a role.
Is there a role for the private sector?
There's definitely a role for the private sector.
In what percentages?
Godfrey, it's a difficult question to ask, to put percentages to that. But, you know, the government must create the solid foundation for private enterprise to flourish. If that happens, jobs will be created. Private enterprise has got the will and has invested the money in mines, infrastructure. Government must invest in the money in the logistics infrastructure to make sure there's route to market. You know, Transnet has been talking about this privatization and the PPP for some time now, and it's been very slow. And I'm very encouraged that, you know, someone like Brian Molefe has joined as CEO of Transnet. And what's also encouraging is he's surrounded himself, and he is surrounding himself with good people. You know, the reappointment of Siyabonga Gama, I think, is extremely encouraging. Siyabonga is an expert in rail.